Hi, my name is Aaron Lido. I work for Microsoft, and in this demo video, I'm going to install ACS database and have it configured where it handles two ACS collectors, sending events, writing events into it in an active passive manner, which helps address planned outages and continuous availability. Um, the value of this video is to enable you to configure the SQL cluster or the SQL database in such a manner that it's more secure than the default, that you're forced with the default. In other words, with the defaults, and this concept has been around since Ops Manager 2007 Service Pack 1, if you go with this configuration, you're forced into SQL authentication configuration on the database. So that you have two collectors writing to the database in an active passive manner with SQL authentication, which is fine for some. To keep it more secure and for easier implementation, uh, following the KISS principle, I like to use Windows Authentication. So how do you do that when it's not available out of the box? That's what this video is all about. Okay, let's get right to it. So we have a scenario where we have role separation. We have Ops Manager, um, sending IT service health up to the IT administrators, and that's one role. They're separate from IT auditors, and this is a common scenario out there in the world today. And so the ACS forwarders in the same management group, could be a different management group, whatever, are sending security events up to these IT auditors. And so what we're going to do is install the ACS backend, two collectors, and an ACS database configured with Windows Authentication, not SQL Auth. So let's get into it some more. Here's the domain controller. We've got ACS administrators and SCOM administrators. Again, it's role separation. One of the key things you have to do in order to enable the PowerShell script to configure the SQL database correctly is you have to create a domain security group. And then add the two collectors. These two servers have already been installed, joined to the domain. The management server roles already on them, so we've met those prerequisites, right? And so what I'm going to do is install ACS on these two. Now you have to add them in here. Make sure you do GP update, refresh, or reboot. Make sure they get those the tokens that they're in that group, which they have. And so I'm going to go on the ACS one. We're going to install. Also, for full disclosure, in the real world, this database and this database are not on the same server. However, in my lab that I'm showing you in this video, I do have it on the same server for sake of performance in my little laptop lab. So we're installing ACS on the first collector, and here's the database, by the way. Refresh it. So there's no smoke and mirrors, no operations manager AC, okay? So we're going to go install, create a new database on ACS1, the primary collector. I'll just go with the defaults here. It is going to be a remote database name. We're keeping it Windows Authentication, right? We're not going with SQL Auth. I've already configured SQL correctly. Let's go with 2 days. By the way, this is SQL 2012 that I'm installing on. This does work. I do have a dedicated script that works on SQL 2008. We're going to go local. Next, install. Yep. Really lightweight install. So once that's done, we're going to stop the service. Hit F5 refresh. Where's Ops Manager? Okay, so I'm going to stop it. While I'm here, I like to always change this to delayed start. Okay. So now I'm going to log on to SQL, which I'm already on there. Hit refresh, and there we go. So now I'm going to open up an elevated command prompt, right, as an ACS administrator. I have full sysadmin privileges on this SQL instance. I have in here, and for available for download, we have, instead of merging it, I just split it. So this one's for 2012, config ACS DB SQL 2008.ps1 is for you guessed it, SQL 2008 backend. The only difference between these two, you can look at it yourself. There's a function where you add the SQL provider. Got much simpler. You didn't have to do as much error checking in 2012. So instead of porting that function forward, I just left in a separate script. Okay, so I'm going to use, I just like to bypass execution policy for sake of documentation. You could do this in PowerShell and turn off, set execution policy unrestricted if you want. I'm just going to bypass it. So if you run it with the wrong parameters, this comes up, right? So let's run it with help. Here's the help. Basically, you need to pass in these parameters: server, the SQL server, right? Or the virtual SQL server if it's clustered. The instance, this is mandatory so that it tells the script so it can connect correctly to the right instance. So if it's MS SQL Server, that's what you need to type in, which is what we're going to type in here. Of course, the security group where the two computer accounts are in. So that said, I've already got this. Here's what we're going to copy paste in, right? That represents my environment. So here's the script, passing in OM1, which is the database backend. If this was clustered, which should be in the real world, in my scenario, it's not. That would be the virtual SQL name, right? And then the instance, if that was named instance, you would change it. The group, domain backslash and then ACS-servers, for my case, where the two collectors are in. I just run it. It gives you some verbose output, pipe back to the command prompt, which you'll see here shortly. And there we go. Now, I'm going to open up SQL so you can see what happened. So we'll go into security, users, ADT server. So that's sad. This has got, all the stored procedures. Let's go to security for the logins. And there you go. Click this. It's got the correct public sysadmin, user mapping, operations, ADT. There you go. So we're all rocking and rolling. Okay. Database is good. Nothing's writing to this database yet, right? Because ACS1 is disabled. Let's go ahead and just start it up so you can see that it works still. I'll go into here. I'll look at the events. ADT server. And it's writing. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop it so that we can hurry up with the second collector. My bad. Stop. Okay, let's go over the second collector. So this one we're just going to join it to the database. Similar as before, again, the only thing different, using an existing database, everything's going to be database running on OM1. Normally you would hit SQL auth, right? But we don't need to do that. We get to keep it with Windows Authentication. Click this. Okay. And we're done with that. And we can come in here, F5, and we're writing to the database. Now you have two collectors in an active passive manner. ACS2 right now is writing to the database. And if we want to stop this, once it's done, come down to services. For a hot standby, what I do is I just disable it. Ops manager, stop. Set this to automatic delayed start next time if you had to fail this over in emergency. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to disable it, and that's your hot standby. The reason why is because the two ACS collectors, it's very important to pass that ACS config.xml between the two nodes, which is not handled by the product out of the box. If you don't pass ACS config manually from ACS1 in this case to the hot standby, um, all collectors in the environment will report into ACS2. ACS2 will say, oh, I'm not aware of anybody. Everybody send me your events going as far back in time. And so you basically do a denial of service if it's high volume. When the tsunami wave hits, you basically DOS your back in. So that's why it's very important to pass the latest and greatest ACS config.xml between the nodes whenever you're handing over control. Okay, so that said, we're done. We got ACS1 writing and sending events into the SQL cluster, or the SQL server in this case, and they both work. That's it.